In this short video series, I want to do something that I think is going to be kind of fun for me to talk through, but also entertaining for you guys to watch. Now, for those of you that are familiar with my channel, you probably already know my background, but just in case there's anybody watching that doesn't know me, my name's Tank, and up until the pandemic, I was a roadie in the touring music industry for about 15 years, and I've done a lot of different jobs. Mainly, I was a guitar tech, but I've also been a bass tech, a drum tech, a merchandise manager. I did pyrotechnics at one point. I've done a lot of different things with a lot of different bands. And the question that I get from a lot of people all the time, not only is who have I worked with, but what's my favorite tour I've ever done? And to be honest, I've liked every tour I've ever done for a lot of different reasons. I was in different places in my life and they were different crews and different bands and stuff like that. But I've never really sat and thought about it. I really don't have a definite answer on what is my favorite tour that I've ever been on. What is my favorite band I've ever worked for? So with this series, I've created a bracket of the top 16 bands that I've worked for. And the way that I did this was I seeded it like it's an actual playoff tournament. And I did it based on the current monthly listeners that each band has on Spotify. I would have done it by overall record sales, but some of those numbers are approximations and they're not accurate and it's harder to find on other bands. So I figured this would be an easy way to do it. And what I'm going to do here is go through this bracket, put all the bands up against each other tournament style, and I'm going to talk about each one, what I liked, what I didn't like, and pick a winner for each round until we finally get to the finals when I figure out who is my favorite band I've ever toured with. So sit back and relax, man. This is going to be a couple videos, probably 3 once it's all said and done. This is the first. So we're going to go through round 1 of the top 16 bands that I've toured with. So for the first matchup in this bracket, we have the number 1 seeded Foo Fighters against the number 16 seeded Jars of Clay. And I'm always going to start at the lower seed, so we'll start with Jars of Clay. For anybody that's not familiar with these guys, they were a pretty damn big band in the Christian music scene in the 90s and in the early 2000s. Like number 1 hits, number 1 albums, used to sell out arenas all over North America and in other parts of the world. But by the time I worked for them, it was 2013, if I remember right, they were pretty past their prime. The tour that I did was very small clubs. And a lot of the time, there was only like 100 people showing up to these shows. Now, I only really took this tour because it was only like 1 month. I didn't really have anything else going on at the time. And I figured, I can just work and make some money. But it was probably one of the more strenuous tours I've ever done mentally because we did like 28 shows in 27 days. So we had like 14 shows right off the bat with no break, then 1 day off, then like another 14. It was kind of intense. And logistically on this tour, there were some things that were just not ideal. It wasn't really run that professionally, in my opinion, and it kind of made it difficult. Now, I was doing merchandise on this tour and kind of helping with assistant tour manager duties. So my job every night was to just set up in the clubs and sell merchandise. Doesn't sound that hard, and to be honest, it really wasn't. We did really good numbers merchandise-wise for the people that were there. But there were some issues that I particularly had with some of the opening bands and some of the merchandise deals that were going on. And then when we got into confrontations about that, I didn't have backup from the band or management or anything like that. So it just put me in a really awkward place. And to be honest, it was kind of a meh tour for me. I don't really have a lot of great memories or anything, even though, to be fair, the band was super nice and I really liked the guys. It was just the tour that itself was just, I don't know, meh. And moving on to the number 1 seeded Foo Fighters. Now, I know a lot of people are probably like, holy shit, you toured with the Foo Fighters. Technically, yes, but technically, no. This is a really weird situation that you don't see with a lot of bands. So in 2015, I think, the Foo Fighters were doing a summer stadium tour all over North America. And while they were touring, there was a team that included myself and 2 other people that a week before the shows would happen at the stadium, we would go to that same city and we would actually set up pop-up merchandise stores. So we would scout ahead of time and we'd find a retail location. We'd rent it out for like a week. So ahead of the show, we actually had a dedicated Foo Fighters retail store. And that's what I was doing. I was helping manage that. So we'd show up to these cities and then we'd get all of the merchandise shipped in. We'd display it all. And then we'd be in there for 12 hours a day selling everything until the day of the show. Then we'd tear it all down, ship it out, and get ready for the next one. So while I was traveling to the same cities, I wasn't touring on the buses with the band or the crew, but on several occasions we did go to the shows and I had friends on that tour that I was able to hang out with. And the accommodations were great. Every city we went to, they put us in really awesome hotels and locations and stuff. And it was a really fun time, man. I have wonderful memories from doing this that summer, man. And I made some great friends. So due to that and the things that I talked about with Jars of Clay, for the first bracket on this one, Foo Fighters are absolutely, without a doubt in my mind, moving on to the next round. The next matchup on our bracket is the number 9 seeded Faith No More and the number 8 seeded Pat Benatar. Now, this might be one of the hardest ones on this bracket for me because I loved both of these tours. I loved the people on it. I have fantastic memories from each of them. But we'll start with the number 9 seed, Faith No More. I actually filled in for a friend that was working for them full-time as a merchandise manager. He couldn't do the tour, and he asked me to come out and fill in. And on my first day of joining this tour, the entire crew was super welcoming, man. And what I liked about their crew was they really picked a lot of their favorite people from touring over the years and assembled like an all-star crew. So it wasn't just an American crew when we were touring in the US. We had a Dutch production assistant. We had a Scottish front of house engineer, an English lighting director, an English drum tech. I mean, it was wild, man. It was so cool. Italian monitor engineer. So many different cultural backgrounds on this tour. And it was such a fun time to hang out with all of these people all the time. And on top of that, the band themselves were incredible people, man. Like, we've all heard stories about how weird like Mike Patton and some of the guys in Faith No More are, but they were just awesome people, man. I didn't really get any of that weirdness at all. You know, they were really into sports. So on days off, we would go with the crew and the band members to baseball games and stuff. And then they really took care of us. They really let us know that they appreciated us. On a lot of nights, rather than getting after show food, the tours always provide food to the crews on the bus after the shows and stuff. They actually had a grill on their semi truck, and the band would take the after show budget and go to like a Whole Foods and get a bunch of food and grill out for the crew while we were tearing down and loading up, man. It was like the coolest thing ever. Super fond memories from this tour. I absolutely loved it. And it's going to be hard to compare this to the number 8 seed, Pat Benatar. So everybody knows Pat Benatar as a legend in, you know, the 80s and early MTV days and stuff like that. By the time I started working with Pat, she wasn't just known as Pat Benatar anymore. Like on the marquee, it was Pat Benatar and Neil Giraldo, her husband and guitar player. That's how their band and how their name is billed nowadays. Now, I started that tour in 2012, and to be honest, it was one of those tours for me where I really grew a lot in terms of being a roadie and, you know, learning a lot of things and stuff like that. And I worked for these guys from 2012 until 2015 on and off and did some tours in between when they were taking time off. But to be honest, there were times where I felt like Pat and Neil were like my road parents. They were like my second set of mom and dad because they were just so nice. And I was one of the youngest people on the crew at the time. They really took care of everybody, man. The accommodations on the tour were great. We were always in good hotels. We were always in really cool venues and everything was always taken care of. And the crew itself was fantastic, man. There were a lot of wonderful people on that crew that had years and years of experience that I got to learn from. And some people that I made like really good friendships with, people that I also worked with later on down the line in other touring industries. You know, Pat's production manager on this tour ended up being a production manager in the country music industry while I was also working country. So we got to see each other all the time. This one for me, I have some of the greatest memories I've ever had touring. I mean, I met my now wife, Claire, around the time I was working for them, and they, you know, invited her out to shows, and to have dinner on days off when we were in Nashville and stuff. Like Claire's got to meet everybody on this band and crew. And it was just, it's really great memories that I will never, ever forget. I think I've got to give this one to Pat and Neil. I got to move on Pat and Neil for this one. As much as I loved touring with Faith No More, I was out with Pat and Neil for years. I have memories that I will never forget in my life. And I really think that's what it's going to come down to with this one. So, Pat Benatar and Neil Giraldo moving on to the next round. This is actually kind of funny. I have to go backwards here because I just realized that I skipped an entire bracket, even though when I edit this, I'll put it in order. But right now, we are going to be going through the number 5 seeded Nick Jonas up against the number 12 seed Sick Puppies. Now, a little later in this video, I'm going to talk about the tour that I didn't go back out on to stay out with Walk Off the Earth. Sick Puppies was that tour. I ended up going and working for Sick Puppies as a drum tech / lighting director because one of my friends that I knew from years prior to this was tour managing them and they needed somebody. And she was planning on retiring from the road and wanted to train me as their tour manager. So I was also doing assistant tour manager duties. And I had a really good time on this tour with the crew. I made some lifelong friends on this crew, people that I still talk to pretty regularly. And it was super fun. It did get awkward with the band at times because for those of you that are familiar with Sick Puppies, you know that their original lead vocalist / guitar player is not in their band anymore. And the tour that I was on with them was right before he left / got kicked out. I don't know what really happened. But there was a lot of really awkward vibes on this tour between the band members, man. Like at the end of the night, after we finished shows, we'd get back on the bus and there was just always this weird, awkward tension all the time. And, we all knew it was, band member stuff, but no crazy drama ever really happened. It was just a weird vibe all the time. And, I will say the most interaction I had was with their drummer, Mark, that I was teching for, who is an awesome dude. I loved working for him and I learned some stuff from him. And then their bass player, Emma, who was always super nice to me, super friendly. And, we had some fun times on that one. But again, it was just the vibe of the whole thing was super awkward. And then when that tour got done is when I went out with Walk Off the Earth in between. And I was originally supposed to come back to Sick Puppies as their tour manager and drum tech at the time. But I had so much fun with Walk Off the Earth that I told Sick Puppies manager that I wasn't going to come back out. That turned into a lot of weird drama as well. There was a lot of he said, she said going on. I was getting text messages from the band members saying I handled this super unprofessionally and just bailed. And that's not what happened at all. I gave their manager a heads up, but he didn't relay that to the band. And it was just weird for a while. But moving on to the number 5 seed, Nick Jonas. This one was actually one of my favorite tours I've ever done as well, man. Again, this was one that I just got a call for to go do a couple month tour for Nick Jonas's first big solo tour. This was about the time that Chains and Jealous were really big on the radio and his first major solo album came out in the style of the music that he's doing now. But the crew that they had out there was a legendary crew, man. Guys that were all over from the rock world. Our drum tech had worked for so many different bands, most recently before Nick Jonas was with Of Mice and Men. And then our tour manager had been all over the place, who I literally talked to him 2 days ago, another friend that I've made. He's now managing bands. And then there were great times all around with the crew. But even the band was awesome, man. And what I found most interesting about this band was a lot of them, it was their first tour. Nick Jonas's music director just grabbed a bunch of people that he knew from like church players and stuff and brought them on the road. So it was really fun to experience band members' first tour when I was already kind of, solidified as a roadie. It was fun times. You could see the excitement in everybody's faces and stuff. And we had a lot of fun times on days off, hanging out and stuff. And a lot of these band members have gone on to do a lot of big things. I know one of the backup singers we had on this tour is now a backup singer for Taylor Swift and stuff. It was really fun, man. I have some really good memories from this tour. I enjoyed myself. Because of that, and because of the awkwardness with Sick Puppies, gotta move on Nick Jonas to the next round on this one. The next matchup on our list, again, another insanely difficult one for me. The number 13 seeded Walk Off the Earth against the number 4 seeded Van Halen. Now to start with the 13 seed, Walk Off the Earth. For anybody that's not familiar with them, they kind of started as an internet band, a YouTube band. They were doing a lot of covers in a lot of interesting different ways. And then they eventually started doing originals and releasing albums and touring. And I actually got offered this tour when I had never heard of them before, ever. And I was originally only supposed to do half of the tour as a merchandise manager. And then I was going to go on to tour manage another band that is on this list that we'll get to later. But I had so much fun on this first half of this tour that I actually decided not to go to the other tour and stayed out with these guys. And I ended up working for these guys, you know, whenever they toured from about 2013 to 2015 between other tours. And again, one of those tours where I made so many good friends and have so many fond memories. I mean, it was, you know, they balanced a really good like family vibe on tour with also just a great party, man. There were nights that we would finish up shows, get back on the bus, and stay up till like 4 a.m, just like hanging out and drinking and partying and playing music. Like they'd get done playing a show and then we'd have guitars in the back lounge just playing and singing and having a good time. We had fantastic times on days off. I mean, it was just an absolute freaking blast, man. And then to go to the number 4 seed, Van Halen. Van Halen was the first tour I ever did that just felt larger than life. Like when I got offered this tour as an assistant merchandise manager, I didn't really know what I was walking into. Like, obviously, I knew Van Halen. I knew the legendary status and stuff like that. But I didn't know how it was going to operate. And to my kind of surprise, I was very young at the time. Again, this was 2011 or 12, I believe. I think it was 12. I was kind of a young, cocky kid. I had done a couple other big tours, and I came onto this one thinking I knew everything. And found out very quickly, I didn't know shit, man. And this crew was full of industry legends that would not put up with my shit. I had a lot of tough love on this tour, man, and I had to learn and grow really, really fast. But the crew on this one, man, I mean, my favorite thing about this tour, aside from getting to hear Van Halen every night, was the crew hangs. Because Van Halen is getting kind of older, we never did 2 shows in a row. We would always do a show and then have like 2 or 3 nights off somewhere else. And they always put us in fantastic spots on days off. I mean, we had like 3 days off in LA at one point, like 3 days off in Dallas at one point, and the crew would always hang. We'd always hang out together and go out and do stuff. One of the nights I'll never forget in my life is before the last show on this tour, we had 2 nights off in New Orleans, and we went out and just partied for 2 days straight, just the crew, hopping all over the place, and it was fantastic, and some of the people on this tour are now like very good friends. You know, in one of my earlier videos, you guys saw me getting fitted for my new in-ear monitors with Charity from JH Audio. Charity was my production assistant on this tour. That's where we met. And I learned a lot from her and other people on this tour, man. And the interactions with the band were pretty minimal. I'm not going to lie. But the funniest thing to me, I always tell this story, is I always heard from everybody before this tour that David Lee Roth is like a giant asshole and I should stay away from him. And the first time I ever ran into him, he was so nice. He was the funniest, nicest dude. And every interaction I had with him after that was equally as positive, man. And that's just my experience. I know I've heard stories from other crew people on that same tour of things that happened. So I can only relay my experience. But I had a blast. For this matchup, oh my God, this is hard. I think I have to go Van Halen. As much as I love Walk Off the Earth and I have so many good memories, the Van Halen tour for me is one of my biggest growing moments and what really kind of gave me a name kind of in the industry, if that makes any sense. Like, I worked hard, I kept my head down after a while, and I just built a reputation based off of this tour. And I had a blast and made a lot of lifelong friends. So for that reason, Van Halen, moving on to the next round. Our next matchup on this list is the number 3 seeded Nickelback against the number 14 seeded Big and Rich. I'm just going to assume everybody knows Nickelback. If you're not familiar with Big and Rich, they are a country duo with a full backing band that is pretty big, to be honest. And they had a couple really big hits in the 2000s, and they've been a pretty staple name in the country industry since then. Now, when I went out on tour with them, again, it was one of those deals where I didn't know anybody in the camp. I just had a friend call me and say, hey, they need a merchandise manager for, some of these tour dates because they don't have anybody. So I decided to take it and I went out with them. And to be 100% honest, I kind of felt like the odd one out on that tour. Our crew bus was full of a lot of people that knew each other and had been there for a while. And while they were really cool people and I enjoyed my time out there with the crew, I kind of kept to myself and I didn't really know many people out there. And then I didn't have too many interactions with the band or John Rich and, Big Kenny, the Big and Rich. But the one thing I'll never forget, kind of a negative, is the first time I ever met Big and Rich. Their manager introduced them to me at a merch booth that I was setting up for one of the shows. It was the first show I did with them. Manager walks up and he's like, hey, have you met, John and Kenny yet? Blah, blah, blah. Shook my hand with Kenny. He was super nice, was really, really, really cool, over the top. Like, hey, man, glad you're here, And then John Rich didn't even extend his hand out to shake my hand when I went to introduce myself to him and didn't really say a word. And I was just like, really? Like, I've had artists 10 times bigger than you that were cordial enough to shake my hand and you won't even do that. So I've always had a bad taste in my mouth with him just because of that. And to be honest, there was nothing eventful about the tour dates that I did with them at all. Just keep my head down, work, and really that was about it. And then moving on to the number 3 seed, Nickelback. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of jokes about this, and I don't care what anybody says. I think Nickelback is one of the greatest rock bands of our generation. I actually love this band. I really do. I liked their music before I even went and toured with them. So I toured with them in the early 2010s, again, as a fill-in. Somebody had to drop off this tour. I got a call from a friend that asked if I would come fill in. And this is how the industry works. It's crazy because the guy that was the lead merchandise manager on this tour, we had toured together years ago, and I hadn't heard from him in forever, and he called me and asked if I would come be his assistant on this tour. And it wasn't too long. It was only a few weeks, but this was my first shock moment where I went from doing like mid-sized bands to just straight up huge arenas, like overnight. It was a really cool learning experience on the merchandise end for me because the merchandise lead on that tour is one of the best in the industry, in my opinion, and I got to learn a lot from him. And there were some really cool crew hangs, man. I mean, it was a giant crew. There was like 12 buses on that tour. If I remember right, we were on the bus with the pyrotechnicians and the security team, maybe. And everybody was super nice and super cool, man. And again, one of those tours where after we would get done working, I mean, it was a party, man. We had a great time out there and we had some super funny moments and we had a lot of fly dates where we had some fly dates where we had to fly like cross country to other shows where the entire plane was like 80% Nickelback crew people. And it was just insane. You could probably imagine. This one for me is an absolute no-brainer because, again, I don't have any memorable moments from Big and Rich. So the number 3 seed Nickelback easily moving on to the next round. For our next round, we've got the number 11 seeded For King and Country against the number 6 seeded Dustin Lynch. Now, For King and Country is another band in the Christian music industry that when I toured with them, it was their very first tour ever. And the main lineup is 2 brothers that are the main singers for the band, and then they have a backing band that they hired. Now, I was doing merchandise on this tour, and the tour that it was on is called Winter Jam, and it's a huge arena tour for the Christian market that goes out every single year, man. I mean, it's like 20,000 people a night all over North America, but it's all Christian bands. They usually take like 10 of the biggest bands in Christian rock and Christian contemporary, throw them in a lineup together, and that's what it is. So it was their first tour. I was doing merchandise, and it was pretty easy. They were really, really nice guys. And some of their backing band members are people that I still know to this day. In fact, their guitar player was actually the guitar player that I teched for with Dustin Lynch, who we'll talk about in a second. But for me, this was the tour that kind of ruined me for touring with Christian bands, if I'm being completely honest. You know, it's a massive tour that makes a ton of money. And a lot of people that run the tour, and this is more specifically on the tour. This is not For King and Country, but more specifically for the tour that they were on. You know, the people that promote it always talk about how it's, you know, they're just putting on family entertainment and spreading the word of Jesus and stuff like that. But behind the scenes, when I see how much money is being made and how much that's what everybody was talking about, what they cared about, and how excited they were getting every night for how much money they were making off people, you know, that's the only thing I'm really at liberty to openly talk about, the things that I saw backstage on that tour, because other things could probably, you know, get me in some trouble for talking about it or get other people in trouble. And I don't want to do that. This isn't like a slam video, but it was a very weird, shady tour for me. And, you know, while I enjoyed working for King and Country guys, didn't necessarily enjoy that tour, even though I did make a couple friends that I still keep in touch with. So the number 6 seed, Dustin Lynch. Dustin is a country artist who was actually the last person that I worked for up until the pandemic. I was actually his guitar tech for about 5 years. Also the guitar tech for his lead guitar player, Chris LaCourte, who was also with For King and Country. So when I started with Dustin, I've never heard of the guy, ever. I'm not really into country music, but the offer that I got paid well, it seemed like a really fun tour. There were people on the tour that I knew, so I figured I would take it and see what happens. And I ended up really loving it and stayed there full time. When I first started, I was teching everybody because when I started, Dustin was like a mid-level artist and they didn't have a giant crew. But by the time I finished, I was just his and Chris's guitar techs, and we had a full crew and we were pulling semi-trailers and doing arenas and stuff. To this day, one of my favorite tours I've ever done. There are things about the country music industry culturally that I don't enjoy. It's not really my thing. But in terms of the people that I was surrounded by on this tour and the people that I worked for, A+, man. I had so many good times on this tour. I learned more about being a guitar tech than on any other tour I ever did. And I will always remember some of the memories that I made on this tour. I mean, this is the tour that I got sober on. I partied so hard at the start of it that I decided to stop drinking halfway through it, man. So these people on this tour, the crew members, the band, they've seen me at my worst. They've seen me at my best. And I've made some memories that I'll never forget with these people, man. It's an absolute blast. And we've traveled all over North America. We've traveled to Europe to play. We've traveled to Australia. Like, really good times with really good people. So I'm sure you guys can guess based off everything I said. Dustin Lynch easily beating out For King and Country on this one, moving on to the next round. Our next matchup is the number 10 seeded Parmalee up against the number 7 seeded Lifehouse. Parmalee is another band in the country music industry. They're actually, it's almost a family band. It's 2 brothers, their cousin, and one of their lifelong best friends that they grew up with. So it's a very tight-knit band, man. And they've been around for a while. They originally started as like a southern hard rock band years ago and then moved into country. And another tour that I just kind of got a call for and went out on. Or maybe I applied for this one. I can't remember. I actually think I saw a post online on an industry forum that we're on saying somebody needed a merch manager and I went out. But this one also ended up being, they hired me as a merchandise manager, but I also ended up drum teching on this one. And the band themselves, some of the funniest people I've ever met in my entire life, man. I mean, these guys are hysterical and they're awesome musicians. And crew-wise, it was really fun and interesting because a lot of the crew guys on this tour were actually from like extreme metal backgrounds. Our monitor engineer, who also ended up being my monitor engineer with Dustin Lynch, who we already talked about, he had worked for like Veil of Maya and Dying Fetus and a bunch of bands like that. And then our front of house engineer had also done a shitload of really heavy extreme metal bands. And it was a really cool crew hang, man. I was only out with these guys for a few months. When we did a headlining tour with them, we were doing clubs and then we opened for Brad Paisley and we were doing arenas. All around, really good vibe. I had good times on this tour, partied a little too much at times, but it was great and good memories. Now, Lifehouse at the number 7 seed. This was actually the first band that I ever did a full world tour with. This tour was offered to me through a friend of a friend that knew that Lifehouse just needed to fill a position. So I ended up drum and bass teching for these guys. And we started out doing shows in the US. We were actually supposed to open on a Nickelback tour. It was the Nickelback tour that got canceled fully before it even started when Chad Kroeger blew out his voice. So when that happened is when I went and did the Faith No More tour that we already talked about. And then when Faith No More was done, I went back with Lifehouse and we kicked off our world tour. We started in Europe. A lot of countries that I went to for the very first time. And the crew themselves were awesome, man. Still guys that I talk to all the time, man. Friends that I've made that I know I will talk to for the rest of my life. Really fun, really laid back. The band was super professional. Like, anything we needed as techs, they just gave us the green light to go get or buy so we can build stuff and do stuff. And they really trusted us as techs to get everything done, which is wild because some of the stops that we had in Germany, we were idiots. I mean, I've already shared the story about Oktoberfest in Munich. That was this tour. And I don't even know how I could function for our show the next day, but the band trusted us to do it. Really nice guys too, man. They're really awesome all around. The crew was awesome again. I loved this tour, man. It was the first band that brought me on a world tour. Learned a lot, had good times, made good friends. I am going to pick Lifehouse on this one for a lot of the memories and a lot of the knowledge that I gained on it. So Lifehouse, moving on to the next round. And the last matchup in our opening round of this bracket, we have the number 15 seeded Red up against the number 2 seeded Journey. Now to start off with the 15 seed here with Red. Red was the very first band that gave me a job as a roadie. My old band actually toured with these guys quite a bit. They would bring us on their tours to open for them. We originally met them on a tour package with Trapped. Trapped was headlining, Red was an opener, Hailstorm was an opener, my band was an opener. But we got to know these guys really well, and they were really nice guys. And eventually, when they found out that I knew how to do lighting, they started taking my band on tour with them as an opener in exchange for me doing their lighting for their show every night. So we toured with them for a while, and then super long story short, I just didn't want to be in a band anymore. I shared that with these guys, and I said, hey, if you quit your band and want to come work for us, we'll hire you. And they did. So I first started working for Red as a lighting director and their merchandise manager, but it slowly progressed into bass teching and drum teching. And I also got certified as a pyrotechnician on this tour. So there were some arena tours that we did where instead of bringing out another pyro guy, I not only did merchandise and lighting and bass and drum teching, I was also the guy loading the pyro every day and shooting it off during the show. So a lot of different things, man. And I will always have great memories from this tour. I still talk to the guys in this band on occasion here and there. I still talk to some of the guys that were on this crew. In fact, some of the other crew guys from this tour are now working for other really big bands as well that I still talk to. Now, full disclosure, didn't really end well. After a couple of years working for them, I was just having a lot of tension with the band, and I didn't know if I still wanted to work for them or wanted to move on and try working for somebody else or anything like that. So eventually a situation happened that led me to realizing I don't want to work for this band anymore. I went to their guitar player and told him, hey, I think after this tour, I think it's just best that you find somebody else and I go do my own thing. And he's super, super cool about it. Was like, we get it, man. Like, we want everybody to be happy. If, you're not happy, we're not happy. Like, something needs to change. And then, without getting into tons and tons of details, by the time we got home, they actually decided they were going to fire me before we even got home from that tour. So still to this day, I don't know, depending on who you ask. I quit, I got fired, but in the long run, it was a huge, learning moment for me, man. I realized by the end of working for them that I had been slacking off because my head wasn't all there and stuff like that. And, it was kind of awkward at first because I would run into them, in other places. And I did another tour. Like when I toured with For King and Country, Red was on that tour. So it was weird running into them. But eventually time heals everything. We, settled the differences that we had. And I've gone and seen them at other shows. I've actually filled in for them, within the last 5 years doing stuff when they needed somebody to come out and do festivals. So I love these guys, man. I really do. They gave me my opportunity to be a roadie. I have fantastic memories of this tour, and I learned a lot. But now we got to move into the number 2 seed, Journey. And I know what you guys are probably thinking. This is probably going to be really easy because it's Journey. It's not, because Journey was, Journey was one of the tours where I really learned a lot, again, about merchandise. I got put on this tour after Van Halen to be the assistant merchandise manager for the same merchandise manager that I had with Van Halen. And it was really cool, man. It was another big classic rock tour. But the interesting thing about this one was Pat Benatar was the opener for Journey. That's how I started working for Pat Benatar. So on one tour, I was the assistant merch manager for Journey and the merchandise manager for Pat Benatar. This tour was great, man, all around. The crew was fantastic. The band was fantastic. It was one of Arnell's first tours with Journey, and he was super nice backstage every time you'd meet him. When he first started, he didn't know terribly much English and had an interpreter with him, so you'd walk by him backstage and say hi, and he would just kind of head down and wave and stuff. But the rest of the band was incredibly nice, man. I mean, this was a great tour with some great memories, and you know, I learned a lot, made some good friends, traveled to some great places, but I think this is going to be probably one of the biggest upsets on this bracket. I think I got to move on red for this one, just purely based on what that tour meant to me, being my first tour as a roadie, the opportunity that those guys gave me, the memories that I made. I'm going to move on red to the next round over the number 2 seeded Journey on this one. So there you have it. Already 8 bands eliminated from earning the title of my favorite band I've ever toured with. And this is going to get interesting, man, because I know I've already shared a lot of information about these tours and how I felt about them. So as we go on in the next couple videos, I might get more specific and tell some like funny stories or something and stuff like that. Try and cover things I didn't already cover. But this is going to get wild, man, because there's some matchups on here again that are going to be very hard for me to talk through and figure out who I actually liked touring with more. Now, I know this video was already long. Good news is the next couple videos aren't going to be as long, so we'll probably do the next round, the quarterfinal, in one video, and then do the semifinal and final in another. But thank you guys very much for watching, man. This was actually really fun for me to sit here and talk through all this, because this is the first time I've really thought this in depth about some of these tours that I've been on. But keep on the lookout for the next video from this series. In the meantime, I have a Discord server that a lot of us hang on, and I have a Twitch that I stream on. So if you want to jump on any of those, I'll throw links in the description below. My handle on everything social media is @TankTheTech. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I can't wait to do the next episode of this.